What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, as they are every Wednesday, Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski and Kyle Dvorchak. Follow him at Kyle Tweets here on the Twitter machine. Myself as well at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. We're happy to have everyone with us. It's a beautiful Wednesday. Actually, it's miserable outside and it's starting to get cold here, but we're heading into week 8. We've got a few days to go. Matter of fact, we got Thursday night football tomorrow, which Kyle and I will break down in the morning. That's been a lot of fun. Matt and I will be breaking down in the morning. It's been a lot of fun doing those shows, and hopefully you guys check them out, and all of our other strategy shows throughout the week, including these two guys with the FanDuel strategy show, waiver wire picks, start, sit 'em, you name it. We got everything. Anyway, enough of me talking. Happy to have you guys with us. Matt, week 8, heading into this one, it's stacked at the top of running back, wide receiver, and our early run of ownership projections, we'll dive into it all, is showing one quarterback with a lot of ownership. It's just weird because who the hell are you going to stack him with?
Yeah, so the quarterback that we are talking about is the one and only Derek Carr. And we know ownership changes throughout the week, but that's, I think, the main problem with Derek Carr. Outside of Darren Waller, you're taking some shots on guys like, it's gross, Nelson Aguilar, who comes up with a 9-target game, or Henry Ruggs, who has been mostly a full-time player. He's about 75% of the routes, a little bit less, but only a couple targets, and they're all just downfield. He's basically just running wind sprint go routes, and John Gruden doesn't seem to be able to get the ball in his hands underneath and manufacture touches. So I'm not sure if this ownership sticks, but right now, if it stands, Derek Carr looks like the most owned QB.
Well, that's one place to start, Kyle. Derek Carr potentially being the highest owned quarterback. Ben and I mentioned on yesterday's First Look show that there was, we both had some interest in him, but I didn't think it was going to be this high. Now, ownership is going to be in flux for sure. Things are going to change, but I'll backpedal for a second, ask you how you're doing and how your week 7 went.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad week. I had some good, the Seattle Showdown slate specifically was just a smash play. So I had a good play there. Outside of that, it was a pretty quiet week. Doing well, just grinding through this upcoming week. And yeah, I'm not sure if Derek Carr sticks, but I think we'll talk about this later. We have a ton of chalk running backs that are all expensive. So in terms of how you build your lineup, it is going to be difficult to get up to, your Rodgers, your Mahomes, whatever, because all the running backs people are going to want to play are all expensive. Derek Carr, although 17.5, I guess if we're betting, I'd bet the under there. I still think he is, without a doubt, like a top 5 to top 3 even owned quarterback. Maybe not the number one, because I do think he's a guy that people think of as a low ceiling style play. He's more of a above average game manager. I'm probably fine with fading him for those same reasons, but I do think it does make some sense. It's a fine spot. I just think I'm probably going to be fading the highest owned quarterback on a lot of slates. Derek Carr on the road against Cleveland, probably one of them.
Yeah. One thing we discussed right before the show started, and I don't know how much impact this is going to have, Matt, but it does feel like, at least now, that the ownership on certain cheaper quarterbacks might be the result of running backs at the top. I mean, Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, Derrick Henry, and then Dalvin Cook we have very low, but I'm not sure we haven't projected correctly yet. So my guess is he's going to be pretty popular. And then I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Aaron Jones in that same game are also very popular. A lot of very good receivers. And then you pointed out tight ends. It certainly looks like people are going to be paying up there. It may just naturally funnel them to go cheaper at quarterback, which I think is really right now the theme of this week.
Yeah, I think so too. There's a couple things we need to wait for, of course. I think the status of Joe Mixon, he's more in flux, I'd say, than a guy like Aaron Jones. It seems like we'll get him back. But if Joe Mixon misses again, I think we could see potential value Giovanni Bernard again. And he's not quite the value he was last week. But you mentioned all of the pricing adjusting. We do have some very, very expensive players. I think people would be more willing to go to Giovanni Bernard than they would to someone like Derek Carr. And we'll see how this shakes out throughout the week. Again, we need to wait on the status of Mixon.
We got to wait on a lot for sure. But Kyle, and we're going to jump into the chalk right now. Want to set this up a little bit so everyone knows where we stand. The one thing that's a lot different this week than last week is all of the running backs that were value last week have been preemptively priced up this week in the event that the natural starters are out. We could see a scenario where, similar to Aaron Jones, the injury popped up later in the week, and then Jamal Williams was already cheap, similarly with Joe Mixon. But you don't see that every week. And if that happens to be the case, we're not going to find a ton of value at running back, whereas last week we had a lot to choose from.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be difficult to find value running back. I think the way we should do it this week, if you're looking to find value, and it will help you get different, because I think there are going to be, based on our ownership projections, a lot of people just jamming in all of these good running back plays, but they will be spending a lot of salary on it, is instead of like, we won't have, Giovanni Bernard and Jamal Williams super cheap, but there are guys who have the potential upside of having a ton of value. Like, let's take, Jerick McKinnon, for example, gets rested last week. Are you freaking kidding me, Kyle Shanahan? Just tell us you're resting him. Come on. I know you don't care about fantasy, but I care about fantasy. But a guy like Jerick McKinnon could come out and be like a 1A in the running game, and clearly like the number one pass catching back out of the backfield for San Francisco, in a great spot versus Seattle. So it's maybe taking more speculative shots. I think like Darrell Henderson is kind of another example of, sure, maybe he doesn't have a ton of passing game role, but his team is a favorite. His team loves to run the football, and in situation neutral game scripts, they actually play fairly fast, like a top 10 pace. So it's more of taking these ambiguous shots with upside to come in and score similarly to a Kareem Hunt. Probably need to take a lot of shots or really nail your picks to get those guys, but they have upside that parallels someone like a mediocre Derrick Henry game or a Kareem Hunt game where he only scores once. So it's going to be difficult to find the value this week. It won't present itself quite as clearly, but that doesn't mean there won't be value. We just won't know in advance. So I'm probably going to be paying down, not all the time, but probably in at least one or two of my running back spots in every lineup.
Okay. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty stoked about McKinnon not getting that work and it all going to Jeff Wilson, but specifically for the afternoon slate. Clearly didn't get to him on the main slate. Sometimes you got to get lucky. Unfortunately, there I did, to make up for everything that happened on the main slate. Anyway, Matt, we take a look at running backs, then wide receiver, tight ends. We'll get to our pivots following that. And then we save the quarterback position for last when we talk about stacks, because there's obviously a correlation there. No need to talk about highest owned quarterbacks now when we're going to do it towards the end of the show. So stick around for that. We go methodically in order. We knock everything out here midweek to get you ready to start building your own lineups, to start making your groups on Cruncher, and we're going to do the same. So hit that thumbs up. And if you guys haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. It's totally free. Charges you nothing. We'll gladly refund your misery if you hate it. Just click unsubscribe and you never have to deal with us again. I don't think you'll want to, but you know what? Hit that subscribe. It helps us reach more people so we can keep putting out free content. And if you want to be notified when our shows drop, just hit that notification bell. And I think you can customize it for certain things. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty certain you can. All right, Matt. At the top of the running back position this week, you have, in order, Kareem Hunt projected around 31%. You have Alvin Kamara around 24.5%. Derrick Henry around 22%. And then I'm adding Dalvin Cook towards the top. And the reason I'm doing this is twofold. One, it's still very early in the week, and sometimes our ownership projections can be a little bit wonky for a guy that missed last week. And I believe they said he's 99.9% sure he's going to play this coming week. But you also, too, have a divisional matchup where Green Bay's clear weakness has been in the running game. And it just feels like this is a spot where Dalvin Cook could go insane. So I'm making the executive decision. I'm throwing Dalvin Cook up there. I do think he's going to be more popular. If you disagree, I'm happy to hear it. But how are you breaking down early chalk here at the running back position?
No, I actually agree with you. I think it's just people aren't sure if Dalvin's playing, but I think we will get that news probably today. I'm assuming he's going to practice, but he's been averaging 21.2 touches per game. If you just look at his last 3 games where he's fully healthy, 25, 29, and 22 touches. And you know what that 22 touch game is not? That's the one he got hurt in. And if you remember, Alexander Mattison almost approached 20 touches as well in that game. We know exactly what Minnesota wants to do. They want to run the ball. So even if Green Bay takes an early lead in this game, Minnesota is going to get the rush attempts to Dalvin Cook. He's active in the pass game, 5 targets in his most recent game. At 7,500, it's some really cheap bell cow value considering the other bell cows like Kamara, 8,200, Derrick Henry, 8K. And those guys are great plays. They project for similar touches, but you just get that slight discount with Cook, which could go a long way to maybe not having to play someone like Derek Carr.
Last week, Kyle, we saw, amazingly, Alvin Kamara at 50% ownership in the Millionaire Maker. That is an insane number on a 12-game slate. He's still projected for ownership here. He is the highest priced player at the position, but there's no denying how much talent and in favorable spots there are running backs above that, Kareem Hunt at 6,900 and up range for week 8.
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting. We have two sort of opposite backs drawing a lot of ownership in Alvin Kamara versus Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry may be the best, if you want to argue this, the best pure rusher between the tackles at breaking long runs in the NFL. Alvin Kamara, probably the best receiver in the NFL. And given that their ownerships are similar, their prices are similar, I'm just going to keep going back for punishment and playing players over Derrick Henry because I know that I get so much value as a receiver from Alvin Kamara. I mean, right now, and this assumes Michael Thomas is out. I don't think he's been ruled out yet, but last week they said it could be potentially a multi-week injury once again. So if he's out, I mean, we have seen Alvin Kamara. He's right now on pace to set the NFL record for running back receptions and running back receiving yards. He would finish second with 8 touchdowns all time as a running back with receiving touchdowns as well. He is like Christian McCaffrey plus as a receiver right now, and probably isn't that far off as a runner as well. Not quite that same role, but it's not that far off, and the receiving more than makes up for it. I just think the upside you get, like double bonus upside with him, multi-touchdown upside, and you just don't get that with Derrick Henry, and he's going to jam it in my face again. I know that. I've accepted that. I've made peace with that. But anytime I can get a 3-down back versus Derrick Henry, I will just take that 3-down back, holding constant that the ownership is, plus or minus about the same thing, and the same thing with the price. So Alvin Kamara is my favorite of the most expensive backs to pay up with. But I do like what we've said about Dalvin Cook. I don't think he comes up to the same ownership as these guys. He's cheaper. His role is great. So I think Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, I'm just a sucker for guys who catch passes. Maybe it's me, but that PPR value, when I can fade Derrick Henry, who could just go out and get stuffed behind the line of scrimmage for an entire game. We almost saw that versus Houston. We were so close. And I'm going to go with the pass catching backs. It's almost always the script. If Derrick Henry were to come in at 5-10% ownership, absolutely. I understand he has a ton of upside, and that's where I play him. But his floor is not the same floor as Alvin Kamara. And I'm always going to take the short end of playing a low floor Derrick Henry.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you there. I also don't disagree if people look to get towards Derrick Henry here. I think his ownership comes down. Maybe I'm wrong. I actually think we see it decline a little bit, but he's averaging almost 27 looks per game. Almost all of them are coming in the run game. So again, no real disagreements there when it comes to Alvin Kamara, but I actually don't mind throwing Dalvin Cook in that same conversation. His touch counts have been through the roof. I know weeks 1 and week 2 were strange. They were playing from behind for large stretches, really the entirety of that game. Maybe I'm wrong. This game, I think, probably stays a little closer than that last one in week 1. It doesn't need to stay super close, but the matchup's just so great. And then Matt, Kareem Hunt, right now we're projecting him for the highest ownership on the slate. It does kind of force you to at least consider saying, you know what? He's similarly projected in ownership to Derrick Henry, and there's a very good chance that he sees very similar amount of touches at $1,100 discount in a good matchup, and he can catch a lot of passes too.
Yeah, I think you said it all. I think a lot of people will try roster construction that's either Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara and then Kareem Hunt, and we do see that he's coming in slightly more owned than those backs, and it's because he has similar touch counts. If you look to the last 3 games, 23, 15, 21, long pedigree of usage as a receiver. I don't think he has quite the same upside as those two backs, but I think it's certainly close, and that deserves consideration in this range. Vegas, they're allowing 4.6 yards per rush attempt. That's bottom 10 in the NFL.
Yeah. I want to stay on Kamara for 1 second, Matt. When it comes to the Bears, they went into that matchup in week 7 against the Rams at 5-1. The Rams were 4-2. They had only beaten NFC East teams, all 4 of them to be exact. They came in there and they spanked Chicago. Nick Foles looked bad, and the Bears couldn't really defend the play action. They also, however, gave up 161 rushing yards. They haven't faced a ton of great running backs yet, but they have allowed 100+ rushing yards in all but 1 game, which was the New York Giants. That should tell you all you need to know. Should we be looking at this matchup with Chicago as actually a relatively favorable or neutral matchup, or do you look at the Bears still as one of the better defenses in the league on the ground?
Yeah, so they're allowing a lot of raw yardage, but if you break it down by attempt, they're 29th. So they're only allowing 3.9 yards per rush attempt. But the thing is, Chicago, for being 5-2, they actually have a negative point differential. So they're trailing a lot in games despite their win-loss record. So I think a lot of that is the function of game script. Teams are just able to get ahead on Chicago, and then somehow Chicago is able to pull out some of these weird, crazy victories. So I think it's more of the game script factor here. And with Alvin Kamara, I don't think you're really worried about the rush attempts as much anyway. He's a guy that you want more in space, which kind of makes him, I think, independent to everything but maybe the best of the best run defenses.
Okay. Yeah, the Bears had an average margin of victory of 4 points going into Monday's game. So I'm not super shocked to hear that, but it is pretty wild. Your thoughts on Kareem Hunt, Kyle? 30.8% projected ownership. My guess is at 6,900, he continues that trend throughout the week and is one of the, for sure, chalkiest running backs on Sunday.
Yeah, just one more note on Chicago. Their first two games were both like multi-touchdown, I think fourth quarters against Detroit and Atlanta, or at least in their first three games. Like those were games where their opponents held the entirety of the positive game script up until the last minute. So just to give you some reference on like how sneaky bad or how like fake good Chicago is, Kareem Hunt, yeah, he's going to get the bulk of the carries between the tackles, get a lot of targets, and his price is really what is so exciting because he's not the same. Like he can see in the same ballpark of the work as Dalvin Cook. He's cheap. He won't see as many carries as Derrick Henry. Few players, if any, do, but he will make up for it in targets. Of the chalk backs, I guess like Derrick Henry probably shuffles to the bottom because he has low pass catching upside, even though he can just, jam it in my face with 2 touchdowns and 150 yards. I do think for Kareem Hunt, it is interesting. We're seeing Kareem Hunt, highest owned running back, Darren Waller, one of the highest owned tight ends, Josh Jacobs getting some popularity as one of the more popular running backs. It would be interesting to fade. Like if you're playing him, it's difficult to do like a mini game stack. I do like the running back versus wide receiver specifically because it does play off the game script well. But if you're doing that, you're probably looking to do it with Darren Waller because we don't know what's going on with their receivers. Like I'm probably not playing Nelson Aguilar in anything other than like a Derek Carr stack. So I think the interesting approach would be potentially to short this game or at least short the Raiders side of this game, play Browns defense. I mean, Derek Carr is traveling. He's good, but he's not great. He faces a defense that's top 10 in sacks, number 1 in turnovers. So I think if you're playing Kareem Hunt, the focus should be on being unique with Kareem Hunt. I think one way to do that is with the Browns and then fade the Raiders side because I want to play Kareem Hunt. He's like one of our best, if not our best values. He has a ton of work both as a rusher and a receiver. His team is second in run percentage in the entire NFL, and they're projected to win this game. So everything sets up for Kareem Hunt to be a good play. I think the focus should not be necessarily on outright fading him. It's how do you get unique by playing Kareem Hunt. You could even potentially throw out like a double Brown stack without playing Baker Mayfield because if Rashard Higgins or Harrison Bryant, maybe Harrison Bryant would be the perfect example. Super cheap. As long as Austin Hooper is out, will be the starting tight end, should get a handful of targets, could see work in the red zone. Make an interesting, different approach to this game if you just play Browns, like 2 Browns, whether it's Browns defense and Kareem Hunt or another receiver and Kareem Hunt, and just say that the Browns roll the Raiders. So I would focus on, instead of fading Kareem Hunt outright, getting different with him.
Okay. I like the thought process. Kareem Hunt was on the field for 90% of the snaps, offensive snaps for the Browns last week. There's just no reason not to love him here. That is a spot where the ownership, to me at least, is very much understood. Matt, I don't want to go too deep down here because we already worked through the 20+% owned guys. But Josh Jacobs is at 18%. You can check these projections out at awesemo.com. Go to awesemo.com/join if you want to look at any of that and use the promo code PUMPKIN. It'll get you an Awesemo Plus Platinum NFL Weekly for $10.31. It's almost $20 off the original. You get all of our NFL content, ownership, projections, top stack tool, all of the incredible showdown content. We have a ton of it. Showdown ownership projections, top stacks. Just go check it out for yourself. And all of the articles that these guys put so much time into, the lineup builder. There's more that I'm missing, but there's a Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well. It's good through Halloween. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you want to, maybe you were hesitant, waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment right here. Use the promo code PUMPKIN, $10.31 for the week. All of these tools too, they're built by Alex Baker, by the #1 ranked player in the world for a reason. He uses them. We get to use them to become better players. I'm just going to throw this out. I don't want to be that guy, but we had 2 Awesemo avatars at the top of the Millie Maker yesterday or on Sunday. So, good things happen. Come over to Awesemo. Not saying week 8 everyone's going to win, split the milli maker with Awesemo tools, but we've certainly seen a lot of success for subs that have come around and used the tools and learned how to play in a different way. So we'd love to have you join our premium Slack chat as well when you do. And if you just want a minimum package for $3.95 a week, we have the Express Packs package. It's all of our Showdown content, all of our Showdown tools, and other stuff for the main slate, player rankings, top stack, light, basically, a lot of stuff for less than $4, a cup of coffee, basically, an expensive cup of coffee, but super cheap subscription that has an amazing amount of great stuff. We beefed it up. So go to awesemo.com/join and check all of that out. It's a roundabout way, Matt, of me asking you, what do you think of Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, I like Josh Jacobs. He's similar to Derrick Henry, and I'm not as focused about the pass catching as Kyle because these guys see touches regardless, and they see high leverage touches in the end zone. So when a guy like Josh Jacobs is getting 23.2 touches per game and his ownership's down, that's what I'm focused on, is mainly the ownership number. We have him here at 18%, which we've seen him as high as 30% in some spots. He gets Cleveland. The spread is close. It's within 3. So I am interested in him in this spot. I think he'll be semi-game script dependent, but again, 23.2 touches per game, and he has seen some involvement in the pass game. Target counts of 4, 4, 3, and 4 in his 4 most recent games.
So the touch counts in a potentially favorable game script, Kyle, could amount to 20 plus easily from Josh Jacobs. But you just talked about potentially fading or shorting, as you put it, the Raiders. Do you feel the same way for Jacobs, or are you more so referring to the passing game with Derek Carr?
I think it probably extends to all of these guys, mostly because this is a slate where I think there's a lot, at least right now. And of course, ownership will certainly change. Like I said, I think Derek Carr comes down a little bit. I would focus more on the passing game specifically, but I do think there is only so much chalk I can eat. I don't think Josh Jacobs makes the cut because his passing game is good, but it's not great. Like, it's definitely better than Derrick Henry's, but it's not like the 6-target game we saw in week 1. I do think if they end up they're on the road against a really good Cleveland team, if they end up being pretty significant underdogs as the game goes on, we probably could see Josh Jacobs phased out as a runner because you don't really have much of a choice if you're losing. So I just like to look for ways that the chalk can fail. Like, Alvin Kamara is a very difficult pitch to sell me on ways he can fail. Guys like Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs, who, if their team goes down, which of course, especially with Derrick Henry, they're not supposed to go down, but they're on the road, and Cincinnati played well against the Browns. Like, anything can happen, essentially. Like, anything can happen in the NFL. If anything can happen and Josh Jacobs benefits, or I guess gets hurt by certain things happening, whereas Alvin Kamara just doesn't, I think those are good spots where the projection is particularly fragile for guys like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. I'm looking to potentially just find places where the chalk can bust. I'm not sure Alvin Kamara can really bust outside of just being not a good enough value to be the best play on the slate. Whereas Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs absolutely do have paths to busting. So that's why I look to fade these guys, not because they're not good plays, just because I think in the range of outcomes, they are more likely to bust than 3 down backs.
We'll get into a whole lot more throughout the week. We've got the 4-hour marathon show on Sunday and strategy shows every day of the week. Get more into guys like Gaskin and Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I won't even mention David Montgomery at this point. What a disaster he's been. But we make the transition now, Matt, to the wide receiver position because Keenan Allen's up there. The price tag is just so low. Even with Justin Herbert throwing touchdown passes to a number of creative players and handing one off to one as well, Keenan Allen still came out with a pretty solid game. He's going to get ownership. For some reason, he continues to be dirt cheap. Tyler Lockett's up there. And then Devontae Adams, who had a 47% target share the other day, 32 or 33% on the season. If you remove that one game where he only had 3 targets, his target share is 40+%. So, these guys, rightfully so, are pretty popular. Tyreek Hill's up there. AJ Green is even up there. The only one is mega chalk right now is Keenan Allen. So let's kick it off with him.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I think it's literally just a pricing versus roll thing, and it's an error at 6,200. He should be like an 8K player. In his healthy games, he has target counts of 10, 19, 12, and 13. Even with his injured game, he has a target share of 30.5%. It's just an egregious pricing error for Keenan Allen. There's ways to move around it, though, in tournaments. I'm okay getting to guys like, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry. If you're playing the leverage, Hunter Henry, as we'll get to, is a little bit owned himself. It's just an interesting spot to see. And, Justin Herbert doesn't exactly have the highest ownership here too. So maybe this is a game we try to just stack if you're playing Keenan Allen and get different in other spots.
Okay, how about you, Kyle? Top of the position, like I said, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, Devontae Adams. There's no serious chalk right now, though.
Yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen, just to double down, is averaging in the games where he finishes, which he didn't really play much of, I believe it was the New Orleans game, is averaging over 13 freaking targets per game. 13 targets per game. If he did that on a full 16-game season, it would set the NFL record for targets, which dates back to like 92, I think, since we've been tracking targets. He is the alpha of all alpha receivers, and like Matt said, like $8K would be an appropriate price. Like, he's not too dissimilar from a guy like Devontae Adams, like Michael Thomas. So his chalk, I'm undecided. I think there are good leverage plays in tournaments. So like Matt said, I think either the way to approach him is to play Justin Herbert with him. Maybe that's how you get different. And then you obviously are probably double stacking it. So that'll get you a unique build despite having Keenan Allen chalk. Also, like Mike Williams, although didn't see a ton of, I think he's had like 3 targets last week, and Hunter Henry are both solid enough leverage plays. They get enough volume that they could eat into Keenan Allen's role, especially if they score like multiple touchdowns. So I'm not exactly sure what I want to do with Keenan Allen yet. I still think I want to play him. That price is just too low. Tyler Lockett at 7,100 absolutely blew up. It was like 15 for 200, and was it like another 3-score game or whatever? But DK Metcalf is still
3-score game of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, my God. I mean, he's incredible. He's truly incredible. But so is DK Metcalf. I mean, that tackle on, I think, is Buda Baker. It's just unfreaking real. But what I'm looking at more importantly is not tackles for DK Metcalf, but it's that he still has almost 180 more air yards on the year than Tyler Lockett. I'm not saying he is a better play than Tyler Lockett, because I believe he's still more expensive, surprisingly, after that game. But I think if you're going to get the ball deeper down the field, close to as often, at least like in terms of air yards, more often than Tyler Lockett, you make for a good leverage play. I think Tyler Lockett is a great points per dollar play. Like, he's totally, chalk is warranted. But anytime we can leverage that recency bias with DK Metcalf having a quiet game, despite still seeing more air yards on the season by a pretty significant margin, I think he makes for an interesting leverage point. I'll throw this back to you. What do we make of Tyreek Hill at this point? Just like, he's like, not really doing much. Last week, they basically got to bench their starters for almost the entirety of the second half. And if there were ever a game for the team to get to bench their starters again, it would be at home against the lowly Jets. Like, what do we make of Tyreek Hill? Is he just like a role player at this point?
Oh, that's a role player is tough. What's his target share?
His target share has been like fairly low this season, just in terms of his opportunity. The air yard share, though, is still is still pretty good.
There's no question. But, this might bother some people, but that's okay. It should. I think there's a lot of other receivers that have a pretty high air yard share as well. They might not be as fast as Tyreek Hill. They might not be as good as him. But if you're getting them at a bigger discount with similar target share, it might be worthwhile. The big question here is like, do you need, and again, I hate trying to go out here and project or predict the game script, but as 20-point favorites, I feel somewhat confident in doing so. Do we need Tyreek Hill to basically do this in the first 2 quarters? Because I don't know Andy Reid's going to keep his foot on the gas late in the game. I'll actually ask you, Matt, since Kyle broke it down nicely and kind of set the table for us. What do you do with Tyreek Hill, knowing that he can have those absolutely monster games, but he doesn't have a 100-yard game on the season, and he doesn't have he only has 1 game with north of 5 receptions and only 2 with north of double-digit targets. He's had some good ones, but we haven't seen that monster game. Could it be this week against New York?
Yeah, it could be any week. I'm just playing Tyreek when he's low-owned in Mahomes stacks. We already know what he can do. So it's not a matter of like, has he gotten the targets? His target share has been fairly fragile throughout his career. It's the big plays are there when he's low-owned. You play Tyreek Hill. Okay.
That's succinct, to the point. Sounds good to me. The ownership this week is coming in, I think, 15%, which a lot of that has to do with the matchup and the price point. Matt, what about someone like AJ Green, who 4,500? It appears all season that Joe Burrow has wanted to get the football to AJ Green, and then they had a serious lull there between weeks like 3 and 5. And now the previous 2 weeks, he's seen 24 targets. He's hauled in 15 of those for 178 yards. Hasn't found the end zone yet. But, if you take weeks 1 and 2, where he had 22 combined targets, only 8 receptions, and the last 2 weeks where he has 24 combined, and considering Joe Burrow's passing volume, it's still sketchy at his ownership, but it does appear that maybe AJ Green and Joe Burrow's chemistry is beginning to gel a little bit.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned at the top of the show, there's plays where we need to just reduce the salary and take some punts. I wouldn't call AJ Green a punt specifically, but he's one of these cheap players at 4,500 that's going to allow you to roster a Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara and maybe a couple of them. He has a 20.3% target share on the year, and most recently that 11 and 13 target game. This Bengals receiving core has been a little bit fragile as far as who's receiving the targets on a week-to-week basis. Like we've seen T. Higgins with big games. He had 5 targets last week. That has not been consistent throughout the year. 3 weeks ago, Tyler Boyd had a 6-target game. So it's been very fluid. There's no specific alpha. Tyler Boyd, 21% target share, AJ Green, 20, and T. Higgins is at 15. That's depressed a little bit because his role has grown throughout the year. So I think on a week-to-week basis, there's a lot of merit in fading whoever the most owned receiver in the Cincinnati room is. Right now, it's AJ Green. But again, it's a balance between where are you finding value on the slate.
Kyle, Joe Burrow leads the league in dropbacks, he leads the league in attempts, and he leads the league in completions. So while his touchdowns have been sporadic and he had a few games there with 300-plus yards and no scores, Tennessee's the type of team that can score. Cincinnati's defense is the type of defense that is going to allow them to score. It does feel like you could see an instance again where it shapes up that Joe Burrow is attempting 40-plus passes. I'd like your opinion on this spot with Seattle's receivers, and feel free to throw Cincinnati's receivers, and feel free to throw A.J. Brown into this conversation as well, because this could be a pivotal point on the slate between these two teams.
Yeah, I think this is, especially if you play like specifically a Joe Burrow stack and run it back with AJ Brown, you do get some leverage off the Derrick Henry ownership, which is just like, I'll just put that in my Twitter bio, like just looking for ways to get leverage off Derrick Henry. I don't know, because these receivers like AJ Green, incredibly cheap, 4,500. His he'll be fairly chalky, but 13.9% isn't egregious. He lets you do a lot of things at other positions because he's so cheap, and you do get a ton of pass attempts for like very low price in terms of AJ Green being 4.5. T. Higgins more expensive at 5.6, but in the context of having like 8,800 Michael Thomas, that's not that much. I do think Tyler Boyd being the lowest owned of the three would probably make him a priority in my stacks of this team, because like we've seen, he has like double-digit target upside, over 100-yard game upside, and he's going to be the lowest owned. He's not going to be super unpopular, but I would make it a priority to, if I'm playing these guys, probably focus on Tyler Boyd and then one of the other two more popular plays. And yeah, it's an incredible spot. Both of these defenses are terrible. Both of the offense can put up a ton of points. And I do think it gives you leverage off Derrick Henry if you play the passing game specifically. Yeah, Joe Burrow, I think averaging 42 attempts per game is just absolutely insane. And he's not bad either. It's not like when Andy Dalton goes out and throws 50 attempts, like I'm like, he might go for 150 yards on 50 attempts. Joe Burrow, quite good, goes aggressively downfield. So I like everything in this game, specifically other than Derrick Henry, who, not that I dislike him, is literally just like exactly like Matt said with Tyreek Hill. When he's low owned, you absolutely play the guy because he's monstrous. When he's high owned, there are merits to fading him. And AJ Brown on the other side is just quite the obvious run back option. Dude is just like an alpha.
It's kind of crazy when you look at target shares on this team too, because Joe Burrow has thrown so much that AJ Green has a 20% target share, but he's got to be like top 15 in the league in targets, which usually, how often do you see something like that where let me see where he is in targets. So AJ Green he's 12th in the league in targets. Tyler Boyd is 9th in the league in targets. And these guys both have target shares of 20%, Matt. That just tells you that's why you have to put things in context. There's so much passing volume that they don't need a Devontae Adams level target share, because if you're throwing, as Kyle said, 40 plus times a game, you're going to get yours.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason their prices remain low. And we talked about this with Dallas in the beginning of the year. Their prices were low as well, and their target shares aren't exactly that high. But we've compared like Michael Gallup to Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown had like a 27% target share and Michael Gallup was like 14%, and Michael Gallup still had raw targets. It's a similar situation here with Cincinnati where their raw target shares might not be immense, but we're still seeing guys receiving a lot of raw targets because of the pace and the pass volume that Cincinnati is churning out on a week-to-week basis.
So, Matt, if you look at the rest of wide receiver, nothing stands out as really super chalky. Devontae Adams, huge target share, obviously. There's a lot of different ways to go here. So let's actually take a look at tight end. Usually we don't spend a lot of time here, and we don't think we have to today. But as far as rounding out the chalk at these three positions, it does appear that you're going to have a lot of ownership going towards Darren Waller at 5,600, Travis Kelce at 6,600, George Kittle at 7K. And then it kind of falls off a cliff because this position's been pretty ugly, but I will point out Harrison Bryant was in the Millie Maker winning team. David Njoku was in the second place team. Darren Fells was in the third place team with a 0. So don't think that bad tight ends, even lower scoring tight ends, can't put you at the top of a tournament. Want to preface it with that when we get into these top tier guys.
It's always a major question at the tight end position. I think being in this mid-tier range is the worst place you could possibly fall. You end up not having the upside of the Wallers, the Kelce's, the Kittles, and then you don't save the salary that you do with guys like this week, maybe it's Irv Smith or Harrison Bryant's your guy. I don't love Harrison Bryant, but he's very cheap, so he fits the bill. And that's a major question on a week-to-week basis. I think we have a lot of options among the expensive tight ends this week. But again, where are we finding our salary relief? Like, I can't play Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, Darren Waller, like Lamar Jackson, Kareem Hunt, and all these guys are the highest owned plays. So I'm just curious where the value is coming from. Like, which value guy are we playing?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kyle. And well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to get ahead of our skis here because we're going to talk about pivots. But what are you doing with these highest priced guys who are clearly very popular for week 8?
Yeah, this is a very different week than we've had in weeks past, probably because tight end is actually like roughly, you could say good on this slate. You know, Travis Kelce, maybe not in the best spot because the Jets defense is bad, but they're also so incredibly bad on offense that it's not, not great run backs. You could get benched in the second half. But his touchdown upside, I actually think makes him, I don't know, I'd probably prefer Travis Kelce to Darren Waller. He's going to be slightly less popular. I think overall he has more upside. I do think, I'm probably just going to be lower than the public on this Las Vegas team. Moving down, I don't know. I think maybe some interest in Mark Andrews just because he falls in the same exact range. He falls right between Darren Waller and Travis Kelce and is projecting for less than 2% ownership. I get Lamar Jackson has certainly not been the quarterback we saw last year. Both, I think, somewhat mechanically, he's missed some throws that I think he should have hit, but also just obvious regression. He wasn't going to throw a touchdown one of almost every 10 attempts or whatever. But if you're going to get Mark Andrews at, a 20th or a 15th of the ownership of Travis Kelce and Darren Waller, definitely doesn't save you salary. You have to find salary elsewhere. Interesting pivot. I think Travis Kelce versus Darren Waller, both are good plays. Darren Waller is number 1 in targets and target share. It's just that I think a crazy high-owned tight end, I could probably squeak out some more value. I don't hate Harrison Bryant. Matt doesn't love Harrison Bryant. I don't love him. He's all right. He's only 3,200. And I agree. I feel very much the same way where I'm either looking to pay up for the high ceiling of a double touchdown Travis Kelce game or whoever you want to name for that spot, or go low, because we have seen Robert Tonyan in week 1 was, I think, a 0 and ended up winning the slant. Adam Troutman won a bunch of people money because he scored 0 points but was cheap and no one else played well. And I realized that Darren Fells apparently was the key to building the optimal construction despite getting a 0 as well. So time and time again, we see these ultra cheap tight ends just do enough or literally do nothing and that be enough, because tight end has been pretty scuffed this season. And, 3,200 for a tight end isn't bad. Harrison Bryant probably doesn't score 2 touchdowns again the rest of this year, but he played on over 75% of the team snaps. He got a handful of targets. Now they're without Odell Beckham as well. Could funnel an extra target or 2 his way. And it's a decent spot. It's got a high total this game. I think it's 53.5 right now. So I don't love Harrison Bryant, but I love the salary he saves me because there aren't a ton of savers. So I think out of all the plus 5% owned guys, I actually think Harrison Bryant is one of my favorites just because he's cheap. That's all I want is cheap.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some pivots, fellas. Guys, hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. And if you joined late, hit the subscribe button. Hit that subscribe. And if you want to get alerted, hit the notification bell as well. So we've got some interesting lower owned spots right now. I mentioned earlier, I still think Dalvin Cook's ownership skyrockets once assuming we get some news whether or not he's going to play. From everything I've seen, it looks like Dalvin Cook is more likely to play than not. And if he does play, I don't think he'll be, if he's 1% owned, he'll be my highest owned player, which is absurd. Maybe not the highest owned player, because you don't even need to get that much above the field. But if he's 1% owned, you're going to want a ton of him. My guess is he comes in the double digits. However, Matt, there are a few other interesting options here. There aren't a ton of great low on pivots. The one that stands out to me, and then we'll get yours, is Aaron Jones. If he comes in at single digit ownership and he's active, of course, that to me is going to open up a lot. I know some people have some concerns about potentially splitting the workload with Jamal Williams, but at the same time, I'm not as concerned for one really simple reason. Jones has 3 touchdown upside. We've seen him do it many times. The guy can get into the end zone, and he's a viable pass catching back against a bad Minnesota defense. If he comes in at single digits, this will be somebody in that high range that I still have interest in, even though he's surrounded by a lot of other good running backs. The truth is, he can give you very similar production, same volume as those guys. But any other lesser owned guys that you like right now?
Yeah, I like Aaron Jones. I think some of the criticism for a timeshare isn't warranted. There's just some teams we see in the NFL that run enough plays where they'll have 1 or 2 running backs that are viable. And the Packers, it's not because they're running a lot of run plays, but because Aaron Jones is so active as a pass catcher, it allows him to still average over 20 touches per game. So with that context, I think Aaron Jones is certainly viable at 7,300. I still think the Giovanni Bernard news is going to be pivotal to this range. Like we talked about trying to find value and trying to go to time backs in 1A, 1B situations. We mentioned like Jerick McKinnon and Darrell Henderson. Like Giovanni Bernard is just flat out a better play than them if Joe Mixon is out. We have Joe Mixon right now projected for nearly 11% ownership, and that's assuming he plays. I think it's very questionable that he plays. Their bye is next week, and there were already Rappaport Sheffy reports hinting that Mixon might sit out through the bye. So if we get a cheaper Giovanni Bernard at 5,800, literally in the same range as Jerick McKinnon, as Darrell Henderson, I'm not sure what his ownership will come in as, but I think he's probably the key running back that is the value on this slate. Like 5,800, we're already trying to search for someone in that range. Myles Gaskin is 15% owned right now if the slate were to start today. So he'd be the guy I look to.
You said Jerick McKinnon?
Excuse me, Giovanni Bernard.
Oh, no. You might have said Bernard, and I just missed it. So I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, okay, Giovanni Bernard.
What about you, Kyle? Talking about some pivots.
Yeah, so I think there are a few interesting, like that Aaron Jones one. I just want to double down on that. They're nearly touchdown favorites. They have like a 30 implied team total, and it gives you incredible leverage off of Devontae Adams. If Aaron Jones does punch in 3 touchdowns, that's almost certainly means at most 1 touchdown for Devontae Adams.
And we've seen him do it more than once.
Yeah, no, you are perfectly on the ball with that. I think you've already stolen the best one. So I'll move on from that, though. I think DeAndre Swift at 5,300 is interesting. He's at home. I think the Indy defense is probably overrated from a really soft early season schedule. He's going to be less than 5% owned, and we've seen his workload continue to increase throughout the season after being basically an afterthought early. He's not a 3-down back. We're still going to see Adrian Peterson, but for 5,300, he falls into that range where I want to find good value, and I agree on the Joe Mixon take as well. It doesn't seem like he's likely to play. Getting Giovanni Bernard value will kind of change the dynamic of the slate entirely. If we don't get that, or at least we'll talk about it right now, I think DeAndre Swift at 5,300, because he's low owned, he's fragile too. Like Adrian Peterson could steal the 1 touchdown they get, and you're kind of dusted. But if he's going to be less than 5% owned and he has the potential to upgrade himself to a very clearly 1A as a running back and the only real pass catching threat they have, I think DeAndre Swift makes some sense. He's 5,300, and that's probably the key, is that I just need to find some value on the slate.
What about, and I want to get your guys' opinions on these, if Tevin Coleman remains on the IR, and we know that Jeff Wilson is out, Raheem Mostert on the IR, JaMychal Hasty has actually looked very efficient in his limited opportunities, right? I don't think there's any denying that. Last week, I think it was odd that everyone completely forgot about Jeff Wilson. Adam Scher mentioned that on Monday, that in a season-long perspective, everyone just wrote him off, even though we've seen him get work before. He's gone too. If Tevin Coleman isn't activated and doesn't play, do we not have to consider Hasty in a game which I was very surprised to see the total as high as it was. I thought it'd be around 48 or so. It's at 54, Kyle. Your thoughts on that backfield if Coleman doesn't suit up?
Yeah, so this is such an enigma of a backfield because, like I talked about, it was supposed to be Jerick McKinnon week, and I think it's interesting. We've seen like one Jerick McKinnon week, we've seen a week where he splits the role with Jeff Wilson, and we've seen a week where they just like straight up bench him for rest purposes, according to Kyle Shanahan. But because he was so keen to rest him after, like, I don't even think he recorded like a 20 carry game. They weren't like riding him like Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
I think this is truly a split committee backfield, even though we've seen some Jerick McKinnon in the past. Like JaMycal Hasty, an unassuming prospect, but I don't really care. Kyle Shanahan has done amazing things with unassuming prospects. So yeah, I do think he's worth considering. My only problem is that like he doesn't have a ton of pass catching upside. I don't think he gets the bulk of the running back runs. So not a huge like priority of mine. One guy we haven't talked about yet, Carlos Hyde on the other side. He's home favorite running back. It doesn't. I think Chris Carson's almost certainly not playing. The problem is the problem is Carlos Hyde also dealing with an injury of his own. I would assume his ownership jumps up if he does end up being the starting back, but could be another way to get value. Right now, we have him as low owned. That probably changes if he does end up being active.
Matt, from JaMycal to LaMichael, P. Ryan for the Jets. I got to ask you this because he's $300 north of the minimum. He's getting around 1% projected ownership right now, 20-point dogs here. The only reason I bring it up is he saw the snap count far in his favor last week for really the first time this season, played 70% to Frank Gore's 28, appears to be grabbing some separation there in a pretty awful backfield for an awful team. What are your thoughts on him, if any?
Laffy, you're going to have to pay me to roster Jets.
Yes, I'm so glad you said this because I saw this on the show sheet and I was like, what? Why?
Gotta ask.
So, I mean, the thing with the Jets is, it's not even that LaMichael Pirines a bad play in a vacuum. It's just I have to spend a roster position that theoretically could have a lot more upside and dedicate it to another back. So I just can't, even if he was $0, I don't think I could roster LaMichael Pirine.
That's not true.
That's not true. That's an exaggeration, but you get my point.
I totally get your point. All right, fair enough. I want nothing to do with him either. Really, Jamison Crowder, the only guy that stands out to me any week for that team. Who knows if he's even going to play, and I don't have any interest in him this week, but ultimately he's the one player that you can get to from that team because everyone else from week to week is disappointed. But listen, I got to bring up these guys. That's my job, Kyle, as a host, is to mention certain players that might make us all feel a little bit uncomfortable. Speaking of that, where are you at on Joe Reed this week, Kyle? I'm joking.
I was like, what in the hell is going on? I truly had no clue. I've never felt so blindsided by Joe Reed. I thought you were going to say like Le'Veon Bell, and I was like, I don't know how to approach Le'Veon Bell. And you threw me Joe Reed. And it was like seeing a curveball, and then the curveball hits you in the face.
I've never felt so uncomfortable as I did last week, thinking Hunter Henry might finally get a red zone target, and then it goes to Joe Reed and then Donald Parham.
Hey, Donald Parham is good, all right? Don't you slander Donald Parham.
All right. And then Virgil Green. And then Guyton. My God, what a mess that was. What are you doing with the pivots at wide receiver, man?
Yeah, so I think at wide receiver there are some interesting. Dude, like, am I going to go back to Marquez Valdes-Scantling again, assuming like I don't think Allen Lazard has been activated yet? Like up until last week, he was just jamming in these air yards, and it didn't happen last week, but it's quite difficult. Like when you have Devontae Adams absolutely obliterating with like a 40+% target share. And I only say that because a really interesting roster construction is going to be paying up at quarterback. No one appears to be doing that this week. Like our most popular plays include Las Vegas, Cincinnati, San Francisco, all rounding out the top four. So I do think paying up for Green Bay, who based on our top stacks tool has the number one chance of being the top stack and is going to be like 3% owned, just Aaron Rodgers. It would be very interesting to have expensive quarterback, expensive Devontae Adams. Then you get savings with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. You're probably still only getting at most one of the expensive running backs. It gives you a wildly unique roster construction, and our top stacks tool particularly loves Green Bay. So for that reason, like I'm kind of backing myself into playing some Marquez Valdes-Scantling again. And like when he goes out and gets 8 targets for like 200 air yards and catches one of them, that just is what it is. Mike Williams, I think, kind of fills the same role where probably is a better talent, but does make for like a good pivot off of Keenan Allen, or does make a good stack with Justin Herbert as well. So 2 cheap guys who can go deep and I think are at least worth considering. I don't absolutely love either of them, but they fit with my roster construction. And more importantly, they're in stacks and leverage spots that I like a lot. So 2 guys that I like, not in love with, but are at least interesting. On the other side of the Green Bay game, another expensive guy not getting a ton of love, 7,200 for Adam Thielen. I'm just trying to find ways to get different without making just like brain dead plays, and maybe Marcus Valdes-Scantling fits that bill. But these are a few guys that I've had some interest in.
All right, Matt, same question to you. Any lower owned pivots with our current iteration of ownership that you're looking for in week 8, knowing that wide receiver just has a ton of options and is usually a very good place to get a little bit different and hit on some lower owned guys that can win you tournaments?
Yeah, I don't hate the MVS call. I wish he would just stop earning wind sprints and get a target once in a while, but he's like the optimal leverage spot where you're getting leverage off of Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. So I really like that. I was very curious to see the Minnesota game, similar to what Kyle just mentioned, coming in with such depressed ownership. And you mentioned this at the top, Laffy, that Dalvin Cook, his ownership likely rises. If that's the case, I think we might even get more leverage with a guy like Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. This Green Bay pass defense has allowed 7.2 yards per attempt. That's slightly below average. So they can be beaten in the pass game for sure. And Thielen specifically, 29.5% target share. Jefferson, nearly 22% target share. And that's including the games where he was just a part-time player at the beginning of the year. Even Irv Smith, like I flat out think Irv Smith is a better play than Harrison Bryant. I know the Harrison Bryant snap share was really high, but he only ran a route on about 56% of dropbacks. Irv Smith is cheaper than Harrison Bryant, and he was running a route on over 75%, had the same amount of targets as Harrison Bryant. So if we're just talking like straight leverage plays, I think Irv Smith is leveraged not only off another cheap tight end, but he's leveraged off other high-owned plays within the game.
Okay. What about you if we go over to you, Kyle, before we hit on stacks here? Talking about tight ends, lower owned. We hit on it a little bit. I didn't want to go too far down that path until we got to pivots. It's ugly. Like Darren Waller at 5,600 is underpriced in a very favorable spot. It's going to push a lot of ownership his way. Travis Kelce and George Kittle are elite, so the same thing goes to them. But you guys talked about Harrison Bryant, Irv Smith, and a few other guys. Is there anyone else at tight end that needs to be discussed as a potential? Throw him in there, 2,500. Let's hope maybe he gets us, 8-9 fantasy points. Who knows what you need from him, but he'll be on the field. He'll run some routes and he'll open up salary for some of these other positions that just have studs throughout.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any other like 2,500 guys. I like that Irv Smith call too, but a few other cheap guys like Trey Burton was like the cash game play a few weeks ago. I think he's a fine enough play. I don't think the game environment is the best, but Indy Detroit could feature some points. He'll be like 5% owned. I want to get your guys' take on this. I'm starting to, as every time I look at our ownership, we have such low ownership on Pittsburgh versus Baltimore, and like 2 really good defenses. I get it, but 2 very talented quarterbacks as well. And no one is going to be playing this game. I know the total is falling, but I do think this is a slate where I could potentially get myself into these guys. For that reason, like Eric Ebron at 3,900 is a fine enough cheap-ish play. I still think Irv Smith, Harrison Bryant, Trey Burton are like all probably better plays. I just think this game in general is one worth targeting. So maybe Eric Ebron makes in some of like my Ben Roethlisberger lineups if I'm building 150. I
talked about it extensively last week that I thought Pittsburgh, Tennessee was going on their own. And obviously another game with Pittsburgh. Deontay Johnson at 4,200 dropped his 3rd touchdown. I'm sure you guys saw that. Would have had a 3-touchdown game. Still a big one. And then A.J. Brown on the opposite side had a monster game. But from a stack standpoint, Ben Roethlisberger had a few picks, 2 touchdowns dropped in the end zone. Nevertheless, there were still, and just to your point, Kyle, there were still 2 plays from that game that ended up having monster performances in Deontay Johnson and A.J. Brown. Now, the issue I have here with Baltimore and Pittsburgh is even if this game happens to pop off to some extent, we're still competing with other games that have a much higher likelihood not only of popping off, but of going nuclear. From something like Green Bay to Minnesota, I think Tennessee, Cincinnati specifically, even San Francisco and Seattle has a 54-point total. Cleveland, Vegas, 53.5. So just to name a few, that would be my only concern here is like, how much do you really want to stack this game or do you want to get pieces? Because if we're talking about getting pieces, I'm on board. When it comes to a full out stack, I guess you could see like a Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews situation, but I don't know if I want to fully load up on both sides of this game. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably a game that I look for one-offs. Dude, like I have the greatest play of the slate. I just found it. I scrolled and I scrolled and I scrolled and I continued scrolling. There's like no way this whole Deontay Johnson 5,500 is so cheap. It's so cheap for a dude who, like, when he's healthy and finishes games, which he like almost finished his last game. Almost. Let's give him credit for finishing that last game. He almost finished. 15 targets in that game, 15 targets, 13 targets in week 2, 10 targets in week 1. Like, he's like Keenan Allen-esque in the way that, like, if you look at the games he actually plays, the targets are incredible. And we haven't.
He was 5% owned at $4,200 last week against the Titans.
Amazing. That was truly amazing. I thought he was going to be like the chalkiest of the chalk because it made so much sense. Like, when he even comes close to finishing games, he gets double-digit targets. This week they priced him up to 55. Like, this is such an easy play. I think he is not only in play as just a one-off, I do think he gives me a ton of interest in continuing to, probably more focus on this game as one-offs. But even when I don't play Ravens, he's just like one of the better values and no one is playing it. This is like, there's no way. Like, but you said it last week, he was so cheap and no one played him still, or 5%. So Deontay Johnson in a game that I have some interest in. And even if I don't have interest in the game, oh my God, so much Deontay Johnson.
I'm with you there for sure. Let's close it out with our favorite contrarian pivot, our stacks of the week. Last week I was Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Got close, right? But you can't compete with Seattle, Arizona. You couldn't compete with Cincinnati and Cleveland. Again, still got some great pieces of that game that contributed to some really great lineups. But you need to be perfect sometimes, Matt. And as it stands now, the highest projected QB ownership, which is how we try and gauge stacks, Vegas. So Derek Carr, Kansas City at 11.5%, Mahomes, and then Cincinnati at 10%. Those are the three in the double digits. Highest top stack probability. This is the top stack tool on Awesemo. Awesome tool. You'll love it. Green Bay, 15.6% is the highest. That's a really high number for an 11-game slate. Kansas City at 15.3%. Then it flattens out a lot. So who do you have here as a potential contrarian game stack that we're looking at for week 8?
I actually like the other side of that Minnesota Green Bay game, especially if all of the ownership is going to be concentrated on the Green Bay side. And you're taking a little bit of a risk. You're going to have to go to Kirk Cousins. He has been somewhat efficient. He is 5th in overall yards per pass attempt, which is great. And I think that meshes well with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. So going to those two plays, like Thielen is going to give you direct leverage off of a Devonta Adams if you're looking for someone who's more in that alpha range. Thielen is not Adams, but he still has a 29.5% target share, 7,200 on DraftKings for him. Justin Jefferson has quietly worked his way into a phenomenal role with that offense as well. So if you'd like to take Justin Jefferson as kind of a middling price play, I think he makes a lot of sense too. And if you're just punting, Irv Smith makes sense. On the other side, you could use him in run backs as your cheap tight end play. And he fits the mold of the tight ends we're trying to get in this point, the cheap tight ends that are just affording you the salary to jam in the studs at the top. So I really like the Minnesota side of this in a really nice game environment.
Same question to you, Kyle. You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
I heard my girlfriend's phone was buzzing and she wasn't in the room, so I was like, gotta mute, and then I didn't turn it back off. That's so right. Baltimore, like you talked me off of it, now I'm immediately back on because I saw our ownership. Baltimore, if we're gonna see Lamar Jackson finally not price prohibitive, which has kind of been the problem with him to start the season, is that he wasn't playing like he was last year, but he was priced like he was last year. So at that point, he becomes difficult to play. Now finally priced down below 8K. If no one's going to be playing him in a game with, like, I love Deontay Johnson on the other side. We saw Juju Smith-Schuster come back to life. Mark Andrews gives you great, it's just the ultimate leverage play, I think, because you're going to get low-owned Lamar Jackson, low-owned Mark Andrews. Don't think we'll see a ton of popularity on, like, a guy like Marquise Brown. I don't think it has a great chance of hitting because Lamar Jackson is still expensive. He's not cheap by any means, but his price has come down. The problem is that the total in this game is low, but I do think anytime we can get low-owned and relatively cheap Lamar Jackson, like, I'm just going to continue to go for that. And the run back on the other side, like Deontay Johnson, is just so free. So this will probably be one of my favorite games to be over the field on because it doesn't take a lot to be over the field on it.
Yeah, for sure. Minnesota, Green Bay is one for me. Someone mentioned Alexander shutting down a receiver in chat. It's possible. I think it was Sal mentioning yesterday on the First Look show that he hasn't really faced any elite receivers yet, maybe one. But everyone's been hurt in the games they faced them. But yes, Green Bay's done a very good job of limiting them. I still think there's a lot to like there. And maybe you can mix it up with that run game if Cook and Jones are lesser owned than anticipated, which is where I really like the idea of going for this week. But in terms of some lower owned stacks, some lower owned game stacks here, I don't know if you need to go crazy. San Francisco, Seattle isn't going to be that insane. Minnesota, Green Bay, there's just a lot of spots right now that I think we can get to without having to go completely off the wall. Even the Cleveland side of that Las Vegas game, and then Tennessee as sub 10%, sub 8%, as a matter of fact. So right now, if it holds, I don't think you need to go absolutely crazy. But getting away from Vegas, if that holds, and Kyle mentioned this earlier in the show, very much feels like it could be the play. So that'll do it for us. Thanks to you guys for watching. We appreciate you all the time. We got almost 600 people in here on a Wednesday early afternoon. So much appreciated, much love. Hit that thumbs up and follow Matt at Matt_Gajewski. Follow Kyle at Kyle Tweets here, myself at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. Of course, Awesemo at Awesemo_com. And hey, guys, if you wanted to listen to this show without going on the YouTube, check it out on the podcast network. Any of them, any podcast platform, we're there. You can check it out there. I know some people prefer to do it that way. Maybe they're at work. Maybe they're they're doing something and they can't be on YouTube. Check it out on the podcast platform. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Matchups breakdown with Matt Savoca and myself. We'll see you back here soon on the NFL Strategy Show. Thanks for watching, guys.